Good morning, Royal We Fellowship. I am so happy that you are here. We are starting a few minutes late as I was gathering some last minute preparations and putting them up there. A quick announcement: I have gone ahead and created a fundable Royal We Fellowship PayPal link. I went ahead and posted this in the comment section, so it's there. Perhaps D or somebody else can share that. You'll see that because a lot of people have asked how you can donate, how you can contribute. So there it is. It's a paypal.me, join me Royal We link. In the future, pretty soon I will be coming up with some, super chat ideas or things of that nature, which can be one-time things. And then maybe down the road, we'll get into memberships. Not quite sure yet how we're going to do this. However, I just want to make sure that it's easy for those of you who do want to be able to contribute or donate or tithe or however you want to go about doing this. Again, not required, but inspired. I just want to make sure it's easy for you so you don't have to hunt and search and look and try to ask questions of how do I do it? Where do I go? There it is. It's right there. There's the paypal.me link, okay? And it's my own little PayPal page, I guess, if you will. All right? So that's there for you. Now, we do have a lot to cover in today's message. We're going to be looking at Genesis 19. There's an awful lot of stuff going on in there. Before we get into Genesis 19, let's go ahead and open up in prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, how holy is your name. And we wait for your kingdom to come and for your will to be done here on earth as it is in heaven. And give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us of our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Lead us not into temptation, and deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. And everybody said, amen. Okay, so when we left off last week, we know that Abraham was visited by the Lord, which was represented by three entities, three people, yet he addressed them as one singular Lord. Three people, Lord. Two of these split off, and then what we see is that they were identified in Sodom and Gomorrah by Lot as angels. So it's no more of Abraham being in front of the Lord, but now it's angels as they have made their way to Lot. As Abraham had pleaded for Lot's life, Abraham pleaded to the Lord, spare Sodom and Gomorrah for the sake of his nephew Lot, who was there. All right, so now we see in Genesis chapter 19, the two angels arrive in Sodom and Gomorrah, in Sodom. Lot was sitting near the gate of the city when the angels had appeared to them, and he invited him quickly into his place, and they said no. Now, it's interesting that right away, Lot was at the city gate of Sodom. This place, what we're going to discover, was so overrun and so corrupt and so foul, and the stench of it and its iniquity and its sin was so great that we even see established right from the get-go that the place was so toxic that Sodom was even sitting on the outside of the city. He was not even able to be a part of the city. All right. And now many of us find ourselves in these toxic situations where even though we're in the toxic place, and even though we have a place in it, we feel we are bound to the relationship somehow, we find ourselves always sitting at the edge of the city. We find ourselves sitting at the edge of the relationship. We're not quite able to leave the situation, but we don't know what else is out there. So we're sitting at the city gate, if you will, of a toxic situation, not really sure what to do. And this is where the angels have found Lot. He is sitting at the city gate, right? And now Lot insisted strongly. He insisted that they follow him to his house, and he would prepare a feast and a meal. And he said, quickly, come to my house. And we get this image that Lot wants to spare these angels from seeing the toxicity of where Lot was staying. He's quickly trying to get them saying, come with me to my place. Come on, come on, come on. And he doesn't want the angels to partake or to see in any of the toxicity. And in this, again, represents a lot of us not really wanting to share the toxicity necessarily of where we're at in life, of certain relationships. We would rather just kind of quickly get, to a safer place. All right. We become kind of afraid, if you will, to talk about it. We feel ashamed of of the toxicity of the relationships we're in, and we just kind of want to hide that. It becomes difficult to talk about. And so now, before they had all gone to bed, Lot does manage to get these angels into the safety, I guess, of his house, what Lot perceives as the safety. Before they had all gone to bed, the men of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house, and they called out to Lot, this is verse 5 here, saying, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Send them out so we can have relations with them." Now, we're already seeing the toxicity, the level of toxicity in this particular city. This obviously can be a debate in today's culture, especially of intolerance of between whatever sexual preference. But in this particular situation, what we are seeing is that the men had exchanged the natural order in this city. They had exchanged the natural order that God had designed at the time, which was to be fruitful and multiply. And instead, they turned their desire and their carnal knowledge towards one another so that they could have these lustful, passion-filled, carnal relationships with one another that were purely pleasure-seeking and pleasure-based. All right. And so this is why these men were surrounding the house saying, "There's two dudes in there. Bring them out. We want to get to know them." Okay. And it's not that difficult to see when we see, especially in today's toxicity, how people act when they start to form mobs. We can see it on the news as people start to form mobs in today's world, and they're ready and willing to destroy property, destroy things in order to get what they want. And this is exactly what we are seeing going on right here. They're yelling, "Send them out." Lot pleaded with them, "Leave us alone. Take my daughters instead." This is between verse 5 and verse 6. And a lot of people are going to have issue with this. Why would Lot put his daughters in harm's way? We must remember something here, okay? In this time that we're dealing with, it's a different interaction between God, between the Lord, and between people. There was a very physical presence of the Lord. It wasn't just an emotional presence like you and I feel, in modern Western Christianity, where we go to church and we have the emotional presence of being with the Lord. In this time that we're talking about, this time BC, this is still Genesis. This is still the beginning. There was a very real presence of the Lord, a physical presence. Abraham conversed with the three that was one with the Lord. These entities, if you will, the presence of the Lord was as physical as you and me. And they were walking, and the Lord was walking to and from on the earth, appearing as a burning bush, as later we'll find out with Moses, okay? Talking with Cain and Abel, speaking with Cain after he killed his brother Abel. There was a very real presence, a physical presence. And so we have to understand this fact first. So Lot knew that he had something not of this world, not of flesh, in his home. He was terrified and very scared of it. In addition to that, he also knew that the men that were banging down his door, this narcissistic group of entitled individuals, of toxic people, it was written according to, and I'm taking this from George Lee Haycock, a writer, George Lee Haycock, that the men were so inflamed that with desire for one another that Lot knew that they would have nothing to do with his daughters. They were so inflamed. This is how corrupt and this is how toxic that city was, and this was the demand, if you will, of these people. Lot knew that they would not touch his daughters, so what he was really trying to do was buy time. He was delaying them, and he said, "Have my daughters," in hopes that the angels, if you will, the physical presence, manifestation of something that Lot knew was not of this world, in hopes that they would leave, find an exit somewhere. And we can see that that was in fact what was going on, because it doesn't even say the daughters were around when Lot said this. He said, take my daughters instead to these people. He's screaming through the door, you can have my daughters. And we don't even see that the daughters are there. So he's trying to delay the situation. And I would tend to agree with George Leo Haycock on that it was a delay tactic by Lot. They get mad, the mob gets mad, and they start to break down the door. Verse 9 of Genesis 19 says, get out of the way, they replied. And they declared, this one came here as a foreigner, and he is already acting like a judge. Now we will treat you worse than them. And they pressed in on Lot and moved in to break down the door. Now they were talking about Lot being the foreigner who is now acting like a judge. Now this is an interesting concept, and this is very true. How many of you in your experiences with toxic narcissistic people, especially when you deal with a group of them, maybe a family, siblings, when they're band together, right, in collective narcissism, what starts to happen is they look at you as though you are a judgmental person simply for saying no. When you start to hold your boundaries, when you start to say, leave me alone, they take your no and they start to call you selfish and judgmental. The narcissistic culture, the culture of toxicity, hates when people set boundaries, hates when you tell them no. Their entitlement is so great that they look at you as being judgmental. And this is exactly what we're seeing right here. They're yelling at Lot saying, get out of the way. Who are you to judge us? Who are you to tell us no? Who are you to give us boundaries? All right. It's extremely entitled. And so that's why they're calling, the people of the city are calling Lot the judge. Who are you to judge us? Okay. And again, like I said, this goes to show the toxic narcissistic culture, their inability to hear the word no, right? Their constant cry is, don't judge me. This is what we constantly hear from toxic people. Don't judge me. We can do whatever we want to do. Don't judge, right? No is a form of judgment. When you're dealing with toxic narcissism, even in today's world, your no is a form of judgment on them. And they do look at you and say, you think you're better? You tell me no, you think you're better? It's absolutely, it's pretty heartbreaking to see this happen. But we see that this is how it's always been. It got so aggressive at the front, the two angels struck the men at the door with blindness. So all the men outside were stricken with blindness to disorient them. And so it's getting pretty intense. It's an intense situation. It's not a joke. You've got a mob of people. Imagine like what you're seeing with the Antifa and this and that. You got this mob of people wanting to do what they want with the two guys. Their passion was so great to figure out who the two guys were inside the house that they were rioting outside of Lot's house. And it was so great that Lot was saying, no, go away, take the daughters. And they were saying, who are you to judge us? We're going to do what we want to do. So you can see how it's not that unrealistic. We see this type of stuff in today's world, that toxicity, that mob mentality, that entitled culture of we're going to do it. Don't tell us no. Who are you to judge us? We'll do what we want to do. This is exactly what we're seeing here. This is a part why the corruption of Sodom was so great. The outcry against the city was so great that the city was to be destroyed. And this is a cautious red flag for you and for me and for all of us in our cities, in our nation. Where are we headed? Where are we headed if we're getting to this place where the entitlement, the toxicity is so great that even people's boundaries and saying no and don't do this becomes to the toxic people, don't judge me. I'm going to do whatever I want to do to you, to your family, to your. This is how we see narcissism progressing. And this is why you and I have to be on our guard at all times. All right. So the two men were still there. They approached Lot and said, Lot, is there anybody else in the city that you want to spare? This is their heads up to Lot. This is verse 12, chapter 19, verse 12. The two angels said, Lot, get people that your family, get your friends. Do you have in-laws? Do your daughters have husbands? Whatever. Get them and get the heck out of here. All right. Run for your lives because we are about to destroy this entire place. For the outcry, they say in verse 13, the outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy this entire city. So Lot did go out, and he quickly found his siblings. He found the husbands that were to be were engaged, the men that were engaged to his daughters, and he said, "Hey, we got to get out of here. The city is going to be destroyed." And they laughed. They laughed it off. Okay, whatever. And their ties, and this goes to show that this is how. Remember the conversation where Abraham had with the Lord, where Abraham was asking, "Listen, if there's 3 people, we covered this last week. If there's 3 people, if there's 10 people, will you spare the city?" And the Lord spoke back to Abraham, saying, "Yes, if there's 10 people, I will spare the city." Okay. What we're seeing here is the proof that there was none righteous in the city, even as Lot would go to tell the men who were to marry his daughters, and understand that the men that were to marry the daughters probably weren't a part of the hordes and the groups of men who were into the lustful, perverted acts. Okay, they were somewhat understanding that, okay, men and women have relationships, and so they were probably considered the good guys in Sodom. Yet they still laughed in the face of Lot when he said the Lord is going to destroy this place. Their faith was dismal at best. They had absolute no faith, no connection with God, no understanding of the realness of the presence of the Lord. I think right there, that's proof in the pudding that Lot was laughed at by the guys that he chose and probably helped his daughters select. And they're faithless people who laugh at him. So you want to know when the Lord is conversing with Abraham, is if there's 10 people, if there's 5 people, I will spare the city. If there's 3 people, listen, not even the men chosen to marry Lot's daughters were people of faith. All right, this is how bad Sodom was. Okay. And so at daybreak, the angels, this is verse 15. At daybreak, we see the angels hurried Lot along, saying, "Get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters, and get out." They were on top of it. When the angels arrived, they had a plan. It was going to be that day. This wasn't a week-long, pack your bags type of thing. Don't forget your toothbrush and your hair comb. This was, we're here, and tonight it's going down. You best get out. All right. Very rough, and a lot of times in toxic situations that you and I are in, we do feel led that way too. How many of you can attest to there was a moment in a toxic situation where you felt the presence of something saying, "Get out, and get out now. Don't wait. Stop delaying. Get out of this situation. It's going down." The whole relationship, the toxic relationship, is going down in flames. Get out. Save yourself. At daybreak, which is that very night, this is what we see in verse 15. That very night, the angels hurried Lot along, saying, "Get up, take your wife, get your daughters, get out of here, or you're going to be swept away in the punishment of this entire city. You're going to get caught up in the punishment of this entire toxicity." Toxicity. It's interesting that the word city is in toxicity. I didn't think about that until just right now. So I'm going to rephrase it right here. At daybreak, which is that evening, the same evening the angels arrived, they hurried Lot along, saying, "Get up, take your wife, take your daughters who are here, or you will be swept away in the punishment of this toxicity." All right. And so, and a lot of times, like I already said, our relationship with toxic people is like this. Many of us become so hesitant to leave. We are so hesitant to leave the toxic situation until we're forced out by this unseen hand, where it becomes so shaking, so pushy. And I'm not talking about the physical altercation of a toxic person. I'm talking about something in our spirit. Something is physically just jolting us, saying, "Get out, run, go." Repulsing us away. And oftentimes it gets to that point before we are able to say, okay, it's time to go, right? We typically lag because we're going to see more of why they lag here, especially Lot's wife, but we typically lag for fear of the unknown. Sometimes we are like, well, it feels, we don't know what we're doing. We know this is toxic. This is a toxic place. It's a toxic relationship, but we know it. We don't know what's outside of that. This is where Lot and his wife were as the angels were grabbing his hands, literally, and hurrying him, saying, get out, run. All right. As soon as the men had brought them out, one of them said, run for your lives and don't look back. The angel said that to Lot and his wife. Do not stop anywhere on the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away. Again, the angels are asserting, leave the toxicity. Leave it. Run for your lives and do not look back. Do not look back. And this is the instruction for you and for me when we're leaving toxic relationships, when we feel that presence jolting us out. It's leave and don't look back, something we have a very difficult time doing. And we're going to see what happens as a result when you do look back here in just a moment. Now, Lot did converse with them, saying, listen, my lords, please don't send us to the mountains because I don't know what's there. He basically said, your servant indeed, in verse 18, has found favor. I cannot run to the mountains. The disaster will overtake me and I'll die. The disaster of the mountains. Now, again, this is the same dude. This is Lot, who, when Abraham and him were having their debacle earlier in the chapters, and Abraham said, listen, Lot, pick wherever you want to go. We've got to divide ourselves here because it's becoming toxic in this group. Lot had some issues. Lot was a very worldly person, very concerned and worried about the world. And so he chose Sodom and Gomorrah because it looked so beautiful. It looked like the garden of God. It was well watered. And that's why he chose it. And so for Lot to look around and look at the mountains and go, no, Lord, please don't send me there. There's no grass. There's no green. There's no water. There's nothing. I'll be scared. I'll be destroyed. So we see this lack of faith, this lack of trust that Lot has as an individual in the Lord satisfying his needs. Lot is the type of individual who needs to see it with his eyes. I need to see where I'm going. I need to see the water. I need to see my mansion. I need to see fancy cars. I need to see some stuff. I'm afraid of the caves up there in the mountains. I'll be destroyed up there. All right. And what's interesting is the Lord entertains that and says, fine, go to the other town that you see, because that's Lot's request. Send me to that town called Zoar. So hurry, run there. And so Lot takes off, gets to the town of Zoar. And then in verse 24, we see that the destruction is taking place on Sodom. So this is Genesis 19, verse 24. Then the Lord rained down sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah. He destroyed the cities and the toxicity, if you will. The Lord destroyed the toxicity and the entire plain, including all of the inhabitants of the cities and everything that grew on the ground. But in verse 26, chapter 19, verse 26, Lot's wife looked back and she turned into a pillar of salt. This is something that a lot of people have wrestled with. Lot's wife turned back to look at Sodom and Gomorrah, at Sodom that was being destroyed after clearly being instructed, don't look back. And what Lot's wife did is an indication of what many of us do and are still currently doing right at this moment, is we're trying to get out of toxic situations in life, which is look back. We look back on our social media. We look back on our text messages. We look back on our emails to toxic situations that we were instructed and led to run away from and to flee from. This was Lot's wife, and as a result, she turned into a pillar of salt. Now, I wanted to gain a different understanding of this, so I looked up the writings of Clement of Alexandria, and he shares this insight. God looks closely at the actual inner purpose of our life. God is interested in the inner purpose of your life. And the statement can mean that she was left insensible or frozen without the power of forward movement. And if we don't have the power of forward movement in life, we are frozen and we're like a statue. We're a statue and a pillar of salt. And this is a representation, as Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt. It represents her inability of forward movement coming out of toxicity, right? So the instruction here for you and for me is that when we are called out of toxic relationships, out of toxicity in our lives, we need to be consciously aware that we need to be forward thinking at all times. We need to be forward moving, and looking back disrupts forward movement in our lives. Again, God is interested in what? Purpose. Your purpose, my purpose. What is our purpose in life hinged on? Purpose is hinged on forward movement only. You've got to move forward. We have to move forward. This is so difficult. How many of you, and myself included, have wasted time stopping and looking back? This halts our forward movement in life. And we become pillars of salt. We become insensible. If we're not moving forward, we are in fact statues. Does this make sense? And this is exactly what we see happening here, but in a very physical and real way to Lot's wife. So let's stop turning our lives into pillars of salt. Let's stop staring backwards, unable to be forward thinking and forward moving. Let's make it a Royal We Fellowship pact here to be forward moving, because this is where God is going to instill purpose in you. And this is where you're going to find your purpose, is in your forward movement. This is where I'm finding my purpose, is in forward movement. As I look back, there's nothing there but lost time, statue. Now then, we're going to get into some weird, dicey stuff here, but I want to help you to understand something. We're going to skip all the way down now to verse 31, towards the end of chapter 19. It's Lot and his two daughters. They are living in the caves somewhere, away from Sodom. We don't know exactly how long after the destruction of Sodom has taken place that we find Lot and his two daughters in the caves alone. And it's at this time where in verse 31, one of the daughters said to the younger daughter, so the older daughter said to the young daughter, chapter 19, verse 31 says, "Look, our father is old, and there is no man in the land to sleep with us, or to give us seed, if you will, as is custom over the entire earth. So come, let us get our father drunk with wine so we can sleep with him." Again, have intercourse and preserve his line. And a lot of people already are, Gavin, don't go there. Oh, I don't like this. So a couple of things that we're going to touch on here. Understand, number one, we don't know exactly how long after the destruction of Sodom this is. And this becomes important, all right? Because in this time, you have to understand that, first of all, we're still in Genesis. So we are very close to the beginning of the creation or the recreation or the retelling of the story. We're not in the modern world. This isn't like, the cities of Rancho Cucamonga right next to the cities of Fontana. You know what I mean? It's not like that. The whole world to these people was Sodom. And then outside of that was nothingness, because there was no population. There were no cities door to door. You know what I mean? They were alone in the cave. They were absolutely alone. And having watched the destruction of Sodom, and also having been instilled as girls, that the purpose was to have children. This is their instruction from the beginning of Genesis. And again, they're a lot closer to the instruction than we are. All right. So we have now this perverse mentality of sex. Our idea of sexual intercourse is very carnal compared to what they had. They were not, at that time, except for in the city of Sodom, they were not, it was not pornographic between men and women. All right. It was understand to fulfill a purpose. The purpose was what? To be fruitful and multiply. It was instructed, and they were real close to that instruction. Their desire in life was to fulfill that instruction, not to have a night of pleasure. It wasn't a lustful, carnal pleasure. It wasn't pleasure seeking. The pleasure was in fulfilling the instructions, which is to be fruitful and multiply. So here's the situation. They're alone. And as one daughter said, our father's getting old. He might die soon. And it's just going to be us girls. What are we to do? The only instruction we have in life is to have children. We're supposed to be fruitful and multiply. This is the instruction of the ancient, of the days of old. This is what our forefathers who have told us down the line through Abraham and Lot, we are to have children. And so this is why they went that route. Okay. This, by the way, is the same line of thinking of Abraham's wife, Sarah, when she said, here, we don't have any children. You're supposed to be the father of many nations. It's not happening here. So take my servant Hagar. Maybe she's the one that's supposed to have your children. So again, it's not about the carnal pleasure. It's not the sexual experience that you and I think of, oh my gosh, let's all, it's not that. It's not that perverse pornographic view. This is the instruction to be fruitful and multiply. How are we going to do this? And well, this is the option. So with Abraham and his wife Sarah, it became Hagar, the servant. Now with the daughters of Lot, it becomes Lot. The daughters are saying, he's going to die soon. We have no children. Let's do something about this because that's what we're here to do. This is our instructions. And so they do that. And again, we don't hear a whole lot on this. A lot of people won't touch this, conversation, but I'm going to touch on it with you. In fact, there's Irenaeus of Lyons in 202 AD shares this kind of along the same thoughts as what I'm sharing. It's not having any, he writes this, he says, it's not having anything to do, again, saying Lot's daughters sleeping with him to have children. This is not having anything to do with being a slave of pleasure, okay? Because they were not. It was accomplished for divine arrangement because there was no one who could give the girls the vital seed. And again, this is in the ancient days is how they looked at it. They looked at that sleeping together experience as vital seed. It was vital to them. Their only passion was to obtain the vital seed and the fruit of children. Be fruitful and multiply. That was their desire, insatiable. And again, it's not our necessarily people's desires today because today's world, it's shifted. It's become the perverse opposite. It's what the devil has done. Again, the devil takes what's right and switches it around. So instead of the pleasure of having children being the vital seed, the pleasure has been twisted into a sexual experience. That's not so with what we're seeing here. So because there was no one who could give the girls vital seed and the fruit of children, as it has been instructed from the beginning, be fruitful and multiply. So this was their only desire, to fulfill that instruction as if their life depended on it. And that is why the girls looked at this as this is something that their life depended on. Their very life depended on them having children and keeping the line of their father going. Okay? So both the daughters then became pregnant by their father, and the older daughter gave birth to a son, named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites of today even. The younger daughter also gave birth to a son, and she named him Ben-Ami, and he is the father of the Ammonites today. And this wraps up the chapter of 19. And again, there was a lot there that we covered. And I hope that there was something in here that resonated with you as far as perhaps leaving from toxic situations, how important it is to not turn around and to look back, that forward thinking and forward movement is the only remedy to stop you from turning your life into a pillar of salt and becoming a statue, an immovable statue, as you look back to the toxicity that you are trying to get away from. All right. With that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Have a very blessed weekend, everybody. And I'm so happy that you are here, a part of Royal We Fellowship. Share with your friends, share with people who would also like to be on this journey as we go from Genesis on through the rest of the Word. Obviously, for those of you who would like to contribute or to donate, I did put the link. I'll put it up here one more time. Again, it is not required, but rather it is inspired for you to be able to donate. And I want to make it as simple as possible. And we'll be back this next Saturday with Royal We Fellowship. Have a blessed weekend, everybody.